And I believe we're live. Harry
Okay.
Whitewolf, how are you doing?
Yeah, all right, thanks. Yourself?
Very well. Thank you for being my first guest here. Uh,
No
I'm
worries.
I'm winging it, and I believe you're winging it too. You're under
We're
the
both
weather.
ringing
You're
it
under the
today.
weather, you tell me.
Oh, I've just got a bit of a cold, nothing bad, but I hear you're under the weather as well. So yeah, we'll just have to see how it goes, I guess, won't we?
Yeah, yeah. Now, mate, we've been in touch now for about 3 years, and your
Yeah,
your books. I really love the variety of what you deliver. You're obviously. I mean, you could classify you as a poet in many
yeah,
ways, but I believe you transcend that as well.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
and it almost feels to me that if in some of your books, if poetry was wiped off the face of the earth, you'd be using another medium. And it's almost like and sometimes you're using that medium, and sure, it's your favorite, uh, it's your favorite writing style, and you use it in most of your books. But in
Yeah,
another way, it just feels like you've got a real message, and you're not just writing poetry for the sake of it. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. No, that makes sense, I suppose. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like your sort of idea that yeah, if poetry was not existing, then I'd use another art form, I suppose. Yeah, I mean that's true. Um, yeah, I suppose all my books are just me trying to say something, whatever that is, and yeah, making points. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, my poetry. Yeah, I do use a lot of poetry in my stuff, definitely. And even, I mean, the first books I released, the Route Number 11 and Road to Purification, they were both sort of in poetic form, even though they weren't strict poetry. So I was kind of doing that before I released actual poetry books in a way, I guess.
Right, right. And I'm reading your. This must be the 10th book of yours I'm reading, I believe. But at
Oh,
the
is it?
moment,
Yeah,
and
okay.
I'm feeling privileged because I've got an advanced reader copy of.
You have the very first one, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. And
Yeah,
and I love this title, Underdogs Unite. And I love the voice you're delivering through this is one of real anger, but I believe it's a positive anger. And I'm not that's not the whole book. There's humor,
sure.
there's all sorts of good stuff in there. But I believe something's going on at the moment in the world, and that's we should be reacting to it. And so it's
Yeah,
great. It's great that you've got that voice, and that sort of um, leads me into a topic I wanted to bring up with you. And
yeah.
I've been meaning to ask you this for a while, but
Okay.
I think Britain is influencing the world like it hasn't for decades. And
Yeah.
my theory on this is something like, okay, so we begin with Brexit, and the rest of the world doesn't know what that was, but it's you had Donald Trump later thanking Brexit, saying that that made his run possible. Then
Yeah,
after
right.
that, you had a flood of fascist neo-Nazi groups rise up in Europe. We've never been further to the right
Yeah,
politically in Europe since the end of World War II.
sure.
Um, and I just wanted to get your take on, you're expressing a lot of that in Underdogs Unite through
Yeah,
very no nonsense words there about the state of your fellow countrymen, what's happening. And if you could
sure.
sort of tell the rest of us what you believe has gone down from before Brexit until recently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you bring up a good point, really, about Britain sort of being the forefather of a lot of stuff that's going on in the rest of the world, I guess. Because I haven't really thought about that particularly, because I live here, I suppose. So you don't really, see it in the context of the world so much. But yeah, thinking about it, there is a lot of stuff going on here at the moment, and that's being reflected in the arts, like Underdogs Unite and a lot of other stuff as well. Um, but I mean, I guess it all started with the Arab Spring, really, didn't it? That was kind of the big sort of protest thing that was going on in the Middle East. And I think Occupy then became a direct response from that in the Western world.
Hmm.
Um, so I think, things didn't start in Britain. But in the last few years, yeah, it really feels like we're making a real difference at the moment. I mean, Brexit, you know, it seems like most of us don't want it, and never did actually, because we were lied to so much about what it actually entailed, and nobody actually knew what it entailed. That was the thing. We were voting blindly with Brexit completely.
Right.
Um, but what the good thing is that we, the people were being heard, and
Mhm.
yeah, if we decided to leave Europe, which, as much as I dislike the EU for a number of reasons, I still think we should have stayed in Europe, because I think Brexit's got more bad stuff that's going on with it than good. You know, when you look at immigration and the rise of the far right and all that sort of stuff that's been the backlash to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I mean, when you talk about Donald Trump, you know, in America, I mean, I'm thinking more about Bernie Sanders, really, because, you know, we've got Jeremy Corbyn in the UK,
Yeah.
who's just achieving, you know, miraculous things at the moment. He really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Bernie Sanders was the counterpart of that in the US. And Donald Trump kind of got on the bandwagon a bit and kind of said, well, no, I'm the alternative guy. I'm the one for the people, which is kind of, you know, bullshit when you look at his past and his business interests and all the rest of it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, we've talked about a little bit, haven't we? And I know you're a little bit sceptical about him, just because you're sceptical of most politicians, which I always have been as well. You know, you can't help but be sceptical about politicians.
Well,
but
yeah, I mean, Corbyn. If we go back a bit to Brexit, because I think Corbyn is almost it strikes me from afar, at least, that he's risen up in opposition of what's happened. And I'm like you, I'm not against. I think if the British people wanted to leave the EU, that's fine, and I'm not particularly. I don't really care on those things, but it's more the amount of anti-foreign, anti-immigration speech at the time of Brexit. And I realise not everyone who was voting not everyone was a racist voting for Brexit. There was many different reasons. You could vote because, you know, your company was, you know, was doing business in the EU, or any number of different reasons.
Yeah, of course.
But can you just talk a little bit about who started originally the Brexit campaign? I believe it was one of your infamous politicians.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all down to Nigel Farage, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if people that are outside of the UK are aware of that, because
I don't think most of them are. No.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's just such common knowledge here, really. I mean, for people that don't know, UKIP, the United Kingdom Independent Party, they've been going for years. Were always a really small party. And when they first started, they were seen like the BNP, you know, the British Nationalist Party, the real far right, you know, EDL types, because they were all about Britain for Britain. You know, we don't want the foreigners. And they dressed it up in nice, you know, political sound bites, so it wasn't coming across as directly racist. But when you actually look at what they believed in, you know, they were only a couple of steps away from the BNP, really.
Right.
And at the heart of that, you know, is this guy Nigel Farage, who was groomed to be a spokesman if ever I've seen one. You know, he was the backlash to all of the sort of austerity politics, in the sense that he enjoyed a pint and he enjoyed a cigarette. You know,
Right.
so all of a sudden everybody could kind of connect with him. It's like, oh, it's our Nige. You know, he goes down the pub, he has a pint, he's all right. And slowly he kind of got into the British, you know, mentality of people started to like him. So it didn't really matter about the policies as much anymore. It was like, oh, Nigel's all right. Even though most of us still thought he was a, you know, complete twat. The general, you know, population swayed towards him very much so. But the real problem here is that they were given airtime. And nobody really talks about this. And I mentioned this in Underdogs Unite. You know, the BBC and the tabloids gave Nigel Farage and UKIP a ridiculous amount of airtime. You've never seen that for the Green Party or for, you know, any of the smaller parties. You know, it's always been the two-party, three-party nanny state here, really, not too far away from the US. And, you know, the Green Party, you'd never see on the 6 o'clock news. And yet all of a sudden, you know, for a few years before Brexit kind of came up, there was a slow increase of Nigel Farage. And the reason that happened was because he mouthed off in the EU. You know, he was standing up and calling everybody a wanker in the EU conference rooms. And, you know, people got laughing at it. So it was little sound bites to play on the news and stuff. So, yeah, so Farage, you know, became much more popular. The BBC particularly to blame for giving him airtime and putting him out there. And so, yeah, he was the one that called for the referendum. You know, there was no other talk about it. It was Nigel Farage called the referendum.
Because it's just such an it's almost like in the US you've got a politician David Duke who's
I don't know him.
Former Ku Klux Klans, you know.
Right.
And I'd say Nigel Farage is not that extreme, but it was only a few years ago, I've been aware of him for 5-10 years, that this guy had no platform whatsoever, and it makes me wonder whether things are engineered this way to divide and conquer us. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, and it also strikes me, as a society, we've been beyond this sort of thing for decades. I'm not talking Brexit, but I'm talking blaming immigrants instead of at the real problems, which are the bankers, which are the politicians, which are the people in power, you know. And now it just, I don't know whether it was lingering all along and people were too scared to say, or there's been a lot of people who really didn't have a mind of their own, and they've, as I say, something's been engineered, and suddenly these are the enemy. A bit like, you know, a decade ago it began that, you know, the Muslim people, 1.6 billion people of the earth, are our enemy. Or if you go back further, you know, the Russians, communists, go back further, the Jews. It's always some enemy apart from who's within, who's ruling us. So I just find it obscure that guy even he was the most, I don't know, extremist politician in Britain for a long time, and then suddenly he's on mainstream news every single day. Bizarre.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's always been this, you know, backlash against immigration, like you say. If you know, it was the Moors or the Romans or whatever, you know, how far back you want to go, there's always been that going on. But yeah, I mean, Nigel Farage, you know, is to the far right. There's no doubt about it, as much as you dress it up. And more importantly, his supporters were to the far right. You know, originally, before he got the mainstream kind of makeover of being this nice guy, you know, he's got a huge amount of far right supporters. So yeah, a lot of people that ended up voting UKIP and voting for Brexit weren't far right by any means at all. Just, here's another politician on the stage now, and he's giving us an alternative to the Tories and Labour. You know.
Yes, I agree.
But yeah, I mean, the far right thing. I mean, I do think it's also getting blown out of proportion in the sense that the media is now focusing on it a lot more. You know, there has been an increase of far right opinions. There's been a lot more of that come after Brexit. There have been numerous attacks on immigrants and stuff in the UK. But I still think it's just such small fry, and the media are blowing it out of proportion a lot. And that does tie in to, like you say, 6.1 million Muslims, billion, sorry, however many Muslims are in the world.
1.6 billion in the whole planet.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You know, I mean, that to me felt orchestrated after 9/11. You know, if you go back to 9/11 and you see who our enemy was in the world at that time, you know, nobody even mentioned Muslims before 2001. So you've had that whole kind of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, war on terror, all that shit, you know, in the last couple of decades. And now, because we've had Brexit and Farage and all this stuff as well, it's like, people think it's okay to be racist openly now. And the rise of the internet as well has contributed to that, you know.
Right. And you're mentioning a lot of that in Underdogs Unite. You're basically implying that it's not necessarily a mainstream opinion, but it's being reported as such, almost as if they're shoving it down our throats, and maybe people, young people, for example, who haven't even worked out life yet, suddenly start saying, oh yeah, these are our enemies, these foreign people who come here and prop up our economy.
Absolutely. And just because you mentioned young people, actually, I think that's a good point, because I think when we go on the internet and we, you know, look at the comments in a Yahoo News story or whatever, you'll just see racist comment after comment after comment, and you sort of think, well, how are these guys not getting shut down for racist abuse? But that's also just part of the internet and how it's accepted. But yeah, I was going to say, that we forget that a lot of these people could be 18, 16, you know, they could be really young people. You have no idea who these people are commenting
True.
on Yahoo. So it's, as you say, they haven't formulated their worldviews at that time. We can all remember when we were, you know, 16, 18, whatever, still developing our knowledge of the world and our politics and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I think that gets exaggerated in that sense, in that there are a lot of people out there that are kind of just agreeing with their mum and dad or the people they know down the pub without really thinking it through. And when they get to 25 or 30, you know, they might be a bit more educated and not believe that.
Right.
But yes, I also think the mainstream media is just blowing it out of proportion. There's no doubt that the far right is on the rise, but I think it's on the rise in a very, very small way. And if you look at how many people in the world are good and you know, want are anti-austerity and want equality for the poor and all that stuff, we far outweigh the number of far right people out there. You know,
Right.
so yeah, media uses scare tactics without a doubt, in my mind.
Okay. Well, I mean, and so that's all the the darker stuff that's come out of Britain. But I think at the same time, there's some. I think Britain can also influence the world in another way, and that's with the politician you mentioned earlier, Jeremy Corbyn, who almost won the last UK election, and has
Absolutely.
risen up on nowhere and is hated by his own party, which is one of the two main parties in the UK, so the Labour Party. He's hated by all of them, which is a good sign, because all those elitist politicians and even the old guard like Tony Blair, that's his own party. They all want him removed, but he's risen up on the backs of the people by the looks. And I wanted to give an analogy here, which is Bernie Sanders in the US, which I think more people will know. And he from the people's vote for the Democrat Party in the US, he thrashed Hillary Clinton, but she used dirty tactics with what they call super delegates and backroom deals in order for her to run against Trump. But what would have been interesting, his popularity was so high. Many political experts say that he would have beaten Trump and he would have been president. But so what? So it seems like, and they made him out to be similar to Corbyn. They made him out to be a socialist loonball, which really the US has gone so far to the right. Like even Obama is definitely right wing. And by the way, I'm neither left or right. If something had shifted, if we'd shifted so far to the left, I would be talking about the dangers of far left. I'm apolitical, but I think the US has gone so far one way that when Corbyn represented a bit of balance, where he's saying, well, hey, instead of all this military expenditure, what about investing back into the American people? But he was beaten. But now it seems something can happen with the UK with Corbyn. What's your take on that?
I mean, it's a good point when you talk about the left and the right as well, because I'd just like to sort of say that I'm, people sort of think I'm to the left, and I guess I am within that spectrum. But I think we need to get beyond this kind of talk about right and left and, this against that and all the rest of it. And like you say, Corbyn, I think transcends that actually when you look at what he's actually talking about. I am a huge Corbyn supporter, and I voted for Corbyn, and yet I've always hated the Labour Party. Actually, that's not quite true. In my time, I've hated the Labour Party. I think if you go back to the 70s and stuff, they were probably doing some good work. But in my era of growing up in Thatcherism and then the Blairites years, I'm not a supporter of Labour at all. But myself, like a lot of other people in the UK, I mean, let's recap with Corbyn a little bit here, if I may,
Sure.
because maybe some people don't, know the story of what's happened in the UK. I mean, he was a backbencher politician. He wasn't known particularly outside of the Labour Party at all for years and years and years. I forget how old he is now, but he's in his 60s, right?
He looks 60s to me.
I think he's mid-60s or something. So he's been on the scene for a long, long time. He's been integral in trying to ban nuclear weapons. He's been integral in peace talks. and being very outspoken about our foreign policy, and that we need to talk more than fucking bomb places. You know, he's anti-royal. You know, he refused to. Actually, I can't remember. He refused to bow to the Queen or something recently, anyway. But you know, he's got all those things going on. You know, and so for years he's kind of been this backbencher figure that nobody really knew. And miracles of miracles, you know, 2-3 years ago, he's elected. No, what was it? 2 years ago, was it? Yeah, he was elected leader after Ed Miliband left. And I don't think anybody had a clue that he was going to become leader of Labour at that point.
No, they woke. I got the sense they woke up none too happy in that party.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think that, I mean, we'll probably talk about this a bit later, but, you know, we do have the more conspiratorial views, me and you. And I think when you look at it from the elite's perspective, they didn't give a fuck that Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, because they just had a general election. Ed Miliband had lost, the then leader of the Labour Party.
Right.
The Tories were winning hands down. The Lib Dems were out of the picture. So nobody really cared about Labour at that point. You know, what I mean is the Tories didn't care, the big businesses, the elite, you know, nobody like that really cared at all. It was just, hooray, you know, we've got some twat leading the Labour Party. Nobody's believing it.
And then and they wrote him off as he will be lucky to get 5% of the election. But it strikes me that he came very close, and he had a limited platform, limited airtime, and yet it strikes me that maybe that I'm hoping that what we were starting to see with Bernie Sanders, where there is a reaction to this elitism. People do feel that these wars are being engineered; they're not organic. Both Corbyn and Sanders are anti-war. They're pacifists, and they said they will not support wars. Now, they said, a number of pundits said, you can't win the presidency, at least at not this stage, saying you're anti-war. But what would be really interesting, I'd just love to see Corbyn in power and see what he does, because if Britain had a leader like that, that can once again, in a different way to something like what happened with the anti-immigration stuff with Brexit, that can create waves around the world where we have a blueprint where we say, hey, that guy's investing in the people. They're not going to war, and Britain's prospering, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said earlier, you know, that I think Occupy came from the Arab Spring in a way, you know, that it was this knock-on effect. And again, talking about Bernie Sanders and Corbyn in the UK, it is that, you know, we live in such a small global kind of world these days that I think one thing in one country can really make a huge impact on another country in a way that wasn't possible a decade or so ago, largely due to the internet, I guess. But yeah, just, I mean, talking about Corbyn, I mean, yeah, I was just going to say that, after he was elected the first time, the vast majority of the Labour Party were completely against him and wanted to get rid of him. And these were all the Tony Blairites that were still in the party. You know, Corbyn is a socialist, and again, that's a word that we haven't really heard much about in mainstream politics, because some people just kind of attach it to communism and don't really understand what socialism is. But yeah, so within the Labour Party, I mean, they voted again for Corbyn. I don't know if that's what people realise, is that they had another leader election last year because the Labour Party wanted him out. So many Labour people wanted him out. Plus the BBC and all the tabloids were giving him such a hard time. I mean, you know, we're talking about how the BBC and the tabloids put Farage up on a kind of pedestal. The complete reverse happened with Jeremy Corbyn, where it was he almost had the David Icke experience in the UK of people just kind of going, well, he's a crazy guy, you know. If you ever on comedy politics shows or whatever, it would be, oh, there he is in his allotment growing his run of beans, you know, look at this old man, poking fun at him, sort of thing, because he didn't look or act like the bullshit politicians that we have. So and
yet he touches a chord with the people, and there's on a very limited platform and so much hate in the media. I think we're seeing that people are starting to see through mainstream media and actually think for themselves. So those are all good signs coming out of the UK.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say was that he, you know, he has made that U-turn completely because, you know, he was elected again as the Labour leader, and the only reason that happened was because thousands of people in the UK joined up to the Labour Party to specifically vote for Corbyn. I know people that have done this. So people like myself that have never supported Labour, we saw Corbyn and we went, hey, here's a guy that's reflecting who we are and what we want. And he's talking about the issues that really matter. And so it was us, you know, that actually joined the Labour Party simply to get him in as leader. So then when the election came around and he had the hugest support that nobody ever expected, you know, the day after the election, everybody said, why does Theresa May look like she's lost and Jeremy Corbyn look like he's won?
Yeah.
Because that was how it was. The Tories didn't get a majority. They shouldn't be in power at the moment. They've had to do a deal with the DUP to get power. So nobody's supporting the Tories outside of the percentage of rich people who support austerity already that they can always guarantee on. So a miraculous thing happened on our election night because the very next day in the press, Jeremy Corbyn was accepted on that political platform. For the 2 years before that, you know, as I say, people had been poking fun at him, had been denouncing him, had been trying to get rid of him. It was a complete, you know, onslaught. But all of that it's all the media and it's all the politicians. When you actually look at the people, what the people have done is gone, hey, here's a guy that is reflecting us.
Yeah.
We want him. And we turned out in our fucking droves on election night to vote for the guy. It doesn't matter that he didn't win. And I don't think it matters if he gets into power. I don't think he will get into power, actually. And I don't think any of that matters. What matters is that the people have started getting together.
Yeah.
And when an opportunity arises, like somebody like Corbyn arriving, we say, hey, here's a chance. Let's get on it. And you know, I think a lot of us want a much bigger change than what Corbyn is proposing. You know, we want to see an end, you know, a complete change to the system. But it's got to be a step-by-step thing. You've got to work inside the system to a degree as well, I believe. You know, it is about working with each other. So I don't think it's all good to just go, well, all these politicians are a load of fucking, you know, because we need everybody to be on side to change things. And I think that's what Corbyn's doing. You know, he's talking about what's good for the common people, you know, what is good for the 90%, 99% of us, and not the 1% of us, to borrow the Occupy slogan. So yeah, I don't think it matters if he gets into power. I think what matters is that public opinion is really changing. And you know, we're starting to get a voice, basically. We've always been here in the back shadows, and you know, it's just, we've never had that media platform before.
That's why I think your title of your latest book, Underdogs Unite. I mean, that feels like what we need to do now is, you know, a lot of the groups, the different groups in society that are attacking each other. It feels to me that they're all the underdogs attacking each other, and then you've got to ask yourself, well, somewhere along the line we've been divided and conquered here. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but I wanted to go on to another book of yours, which was probably the favorite of yours that I've read, is The Road to Purification, and it came at a time I was at a low point, and I got this book. I don't think I knew you or didn't know you well at this point, but it really struck a chord with me on a number of levels. I mean, so you're and it's a weird. I take it it's somewhere. It's halfway between, and you never quite classify it clearly, which I like. But it feels like it's halfway between a memoir and a novel, and you never specify what might have happened to you and what was inspired, you know, and then led to fiction. But it's a fascinating book, because you travel from the UK, you go to Egypt, and but what I like is that you get way off the beaten path. You're not interested in any you describe your character like you're just going along, look at all those fucking idiots, you know, lining up for the pyramids, whatever, and then here you are way in the back streets of Cairo doing some dangerous shit. Uh,
Yeah.
but but that's like real. You're experiencing real adventures. But also, I wanted to what fascinates me there is the pyramids, and you do touch on.
Mhm.
I think we possibly share similar ideas about ancient civilizations, and that once
Yeah.
again, it's different to what mainstream media are are telling us is definitely true about these whoever built the pyramids. So can you sort of formulate within the context of Road to Purification what your beliefs are on the Egyptians?
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I just wanted to just whilst it's on my mind, you were sort of talking about whether that book is a novel or a memoir. If I could just quickly talk about that, because I just find that really interesting, actually, because that's the exact response I want from that book. So that's why I just wanted to pick up on it, because it is 100% true. It's not a novel. It's
Wow.
called a true story. It is 100% true, every single aspect of it. The only difference is that there are chapters in it which read like fiction because, well, the devil makes an appearance for starters. um, he suddenly becomes a character in the book, and I've got him as a very sort of real character. But that is a reflection of what my reality was at that time.
Right.
So thing. It was a true story, but it's also a true story of what was going on in my head
Mm.
and in my spiritual world as well. And then I put that together so it read like a novel. But to me, that is still 100% true reflection of my journey and what I went through,
Okay.
regardless of if it's in it like that. But anyway, yeah, sorry, to get back onto the yeah, so the pyramids, yeah, well, I was lucky enough. I was lucky enough to go inside the Great Pyramid, as is described in that book, and I felt very blessed to be able to do that because they're often closed. They only allow a certain amount of people in, so there's never any guarantee that you can turn up at the pyramids and get inside. And I was also, I mean, it's also worth mentioning that I just split up with my girlfriend, and that's why I'd gone to Egypt, and so I was kind of in this depressive, awful state.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
and so I was having a terrible time in Egypt, as you may remember, when I got to the Giza Plateau, and there was this kind of little moment of light amongst all that darkness because I'd always lifelong dream of wanting to go to see the pyramids. And there was me in this almost suicidal state.
Yeah. I
So
like that. I really enjoyed that contrast and the humor. Like here you are, like people would give their eye teeth to be able to go to the pyramids, and here you are, just on really, really crazy.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it was a real moment of sort of light and sort of saying, oh yeah, the good of the world is on my side when I got to get into the pyramids, in the
Yeah.
Great Pyramid. Went to the Red Pyramid as well. So yeah, it was great to actually get in the King's Chamber and experience that. But yeah, what I wanted to say was that I was actually the first one into the chamber as well. So I actually had like about maybe 4 minutes of being completely by myself in the chamber, and that's why I felt so blessed. It felt
Wow.
like it had been orchestrated for me to kind of arrive there first. I even overtook some people that had paused for a breath on the stairway up. So it was like, wow,
Mm.
yeah, that felt quite special, really. But yeah, I've always been interested in ancient Egypt, more specifically, just uh, I don't know where to begin with this, really.
I can give it. I can give you. I think we've had similar experiences here where
Yeah,
I haven't been to Egypt, but I've been to Teotihuacan in Mexico.
yeah, of
So
course,
those are
yeah,
the Mexican pyramids, which I found incredible.
yeah,
And I think I might be putting words in your mouth, but from what I read from the Road to Purification, it seems like we have some similar, or we sense something is not right about what's being presented with mainstream history with these. Like we're told that these are, desert nomads or whatever, and they weren't building anything else like this anywhere. And suddenly
yeah,
these pyramids rise up, but we're meant to accept, well, hey, they just did that on the run. So what?
yeah,
We're the greatest scientific civilization now. Forget about these. these people 10,000 years ago, or whatever, they didn't know shit. But
Yeah.
then, hang on, you're standing there in the. I mean, I haven't been to Egypt, but I imagine you're standing there in the desert. You look up and you go, you're thinking about that story. Now, hang on, what? You know?
How did they do this? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, even if you look at the accepted chronology of how the pyramids were made, including all the pyramids in Egypt, I mean, you know, there's not that development that you would expect in a, you know, there's supposed to be an evolution in building. You know, it's supposed to be, well, you've mastered this, and then the bit after that's supposed to get even better. Whereas the reverse was true in Egypt. You know, they
yeah,
made a couple of pyramids that weren't quite as good. Then they made the three on the Giza Plateau, which were just spectacular and which we can't even recreate today.
mm,
And then they got worse after that. So that alone points to something. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if people know about Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval. I don't know how you pronounce his surname, actually. Bauval.
right,
You know, these are writers. Robert Bauval, in particular, he was the guy that discovered, as you probably know, that the three pyramids on the Giza Plateau corresponded to the three stars of Orion's belt. Now, that was only in 1992, I believe, or I think he published the book for that in 92, somewhere around there. So that's a very recent thing, you know. It's
yeah,
only a
you're
couple
right.
of
Actually, that's a very good point. I mean, if you go back, we're only talking. I mean, the first author to touch any of this was probably Eric von Däniken. I know he
yeah,
didn't specifically
yeah,
talk about Egypt, or I'm not
you're right,
aware he
yeah,
did, but he was more in South America. But he's talking about these ancient civilizations, and all these people were laughed at first, including I think Graham Hancock to a degree. But
yeah,
now Hancock is really starting to get a lot of scientists on his side, or at least talking to him, debating him, and it's getting
yeah,
very, very interesting. And we keep getting, the dates of these, the dating on these, you know, these engineering feats keep getting
mhm.
dated further and further back, and it doesn't quite stack up. Like you've got that one in, I think it's Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, is it?
The what? Sorry.
Um, there's one called Göbekli Tepe, I think is the name, or Göbekli. Forget how to
I don't,
pronounce that one. But they're saying now that that's about 12,000 years old.
oh,
So
okay.
we're going further and further back, and then as you say, it doesn't suddenly. Then we're moving to people are living in tents 6,000
Yeah,
years ago. It doesn't.
yeah. I
Something.
mean,
It seems like something's lost. You know.
yeah, I mean, you bring up some very good points because I mean, the difference. Eric von Däniken was kind of a trailblazer in all of this stuff because he was the
Mm,
first sort of mainstream person to come up with these ideas of saying, well, hold on, ancient civilizations had uh, possible connections with aliens, but they also had a lot more technology than we thought. But a lot of von Daniken's stuff was speculation. You know, it was kind of
true.
looking at the lid of Palenque and sort of saying, well, this guy looks as though he's driving a spaceship. And it does. You know,
Yeah.
that's not crazy because it really does look like that. But you've still just got someone's speculation about that.
Sure.
Whereas Hancock and Robert Bauval are just talking common sense and reeling off fact after fact. And that's what's changed things. So when Robert Bauval discovered that the three pyramids corresponded to Orion's belt, you know, you can't dispute that. You know, you can take, you know, you take a photograph of the three pyramids, an aerial view, you know, you overlap that with Orion's belt, they are spot on. It's not like, oh, they just look a bit like it. They're spot on. You know, we know for a fact that the pyramids were based on that. And then when you look at the position of the Nile River, that's also in position of the Milky Way. So things start to get a bit bigger and you start looking at other sites and saying, oh, well, hold on, it's not just Orion's belt. Actually, a lot of Egypt and other parts of the world may have been reflecting the sky.
Mm,
And the interesting part about that is that, you know, we're able to look back at the history of star positions. So the Giza Plateau is reflecting 10,500 BC.
yeah.
So, yeah, and there are lots of other indicators that point towards this date. So it seems as though the people that built the pyramids wanted to install this date in us. I'm sure there were many reasons for building the pyramids, but I think one of them was to say 10,500, which also corresponds to the Great Flood. Supposedly was sort of after that date. And yeah, when you look at the Sphinx, it's been proven, I think I'm right in saying it's proven that the Sphinx has water damage to it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've heard that too. Yeah.
You know, but what they've proven is that it wasn't rain that caused that. It had to be submerged in water. So all these little contributing factors, you know, they all point towards this date of 10,500. And then, of course, with the Great Pyramid, I mean, you know, I could be here for an hour reeling off the amount of things that are in that. But just for a couple, you know, I think the measurements of the base are 365. Forget specifics, but there's a number of 365 in there, which corresponds to the days of the year. When you look at the incline of the pyramid, when you work that out as a fraction or something, it becomes the distance between us and the sun. Then you've got the two shafts in the King's Chamber that point towards Alpha Draconis and Orion's Belt, and again, that's pointing towards 10,500. You know, in order for the shaft to look at those two constellations, it would have to have been 10,500. Excuse me. So, you know, I think it's absurd that anybody could just say that's all bullshit. They were just a bunch of nomadics that built a few coffins. You know,
I mean, it's just crazy.
The other thing quickly is that no bodies were ever found in the Great Pyramid, and it's only been attributed to Khufu because his name was scrawled on the pyramid, like hundreds of other fucking graffitis have been done in the life. You know, there's no proof at all that it was his pyramid, that he built it. No bodies were ever found in it. And the sarcophagus inside the pyramid doesn't even have any attributes to the other sarcophaguses of that time. You know, it's built out of stone in that structure. It's not movable. It's built into the pyramid. And we know that diamond-tipped saws were used to create it, which again is just miraculous to think that they were using that sort of technology at that time.
I mean, the other, you know, I'll just touch on, you wrote a book called Route Number 11. I believe that was your first book. And you've got, so, you know, I've been to Latin America, you've been to South America, and so, you know, you can see in the Latin American cultures there's some interesting stuff too. I mean, you've got the Nazca lines, which you know, I've seen you written I'm pretty sure I've seen you write on a blog or somewhere about that too. But the thing is, I mean, you can only see them from the air. How can you explain that away? What were ancient peoples doing, designing things that can only be seen from the air? Why would you do that?
Absolutely. I mean, I was lucky enough to fly over the Nazca lines, as you know. So yeah, I'm very blessed to have really seen them. But yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, they are just carved into the desert, covering, you know, massive kilometers. You know, they can't be seen from ground level or from hills. There are other geoglyphs in the South American area that you can see from hills, but the Nazca lines, you can't. They can only be seen from the air. And they were only discovered when planes started flying over them. And someone looked down and went, oh my God, there's all these monkeys and birds and shit carved into the desert. Like, how did that happen? You know, and yeah, they're thousands of years old. Well, yeah, they're very ancient. That was one of the main things that von Daniken brought up in his Chariots of the God as well. You know, it was like, why carve something that, first of all, was very difficult to carve such a huge thing in a desert and get it to the right perspective, although that is possible. That still alone is quite a great feat. But more importantly, why do that? Why go to the trouble of doing it? And why do something that can only be seen from the air, which human beings can't see?
That's right. Yeah,
you know, so, and then of course you get the theories about, well, was it for aliens? Was it for out-of-body experiences? And the main thing about those Nazca lines is that there is a huge runway running down the middle of it. Now I call it a runway because that's what the term has been used, but it looks like a fucking runway.
Doesn't
You
it?
know,
Yeah.
it's just this huge stretch. If you know, it's a runway. So suddenly, ideas like ancient aliens aren't as crazy as they once sound. You know, it's one of these things that people kind of hear about these theories without reading about it, and it sounds
Yeah.
crazy. But as soon as you actually start reading it, and like I say, the literature that's really been around, like Hancock and stuff's only been the last 20, 30 years. So it's
Sure.
very, I think public opinion has swayed so far in such a short amount of time about these kinds of things
Mm.
without the establishment catching up, by the way. There are still Egyptologists that refute Robert Baldwin's work, which it's just crazy.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, it seems. I think you're very lucky to have been to the Nazca lines and the Egyptian pyramids, and I think by experiencing those, it's one thing to see them on TV, it's one thing to read about them, but when you're actually there, well, you start to. I sense it's deepened you as a person because you can't really explain that away by. You could possibly say, well, maybe the Egyptologists are right, maybe this, but you can't. It's just one theory, and so it opens you up to the Earth's history is possibly a lot more sophisticated and varied than we know. And I think once you consider that, then it's like you're a deeper. I think that's flowed through to your writing and also what you stand for as a social activist as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm just also thinking of going on a bit of a tangent. Like, I mean, things like the Alexandria Library, for instance, we know were burnt down. We know how many texts were lost. And, in the last 100 years, we've found things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi texts and stuff like that as well. So I think that's another indication of just how much information there used to be, which we lost. And a lot of that was purposely gotten rid of. Not too dissimilar to what's going on in Iraq and stuff at the moment, actually, of knocking down, the ancient sculptures and stuff. So I'm just saying that I think, this information used to be there, but we're talking thousands of years ago, and we only have a history of 6,000 years pretty much, and I think our views of that are very skewed. Even when you look at theory of evolution and things like Lucy come along and disrupt, people's what we believe is changing all the time, and it's only based on the evidence that we have. And I think people are starting to look at the actual evidence that we have about things, as opposed to just believing the accepted viewpoint that we have for centuries now.
Yeah, and I think within the Road to Purification, and what I like is that you just drip feed a couple of these ideas. You don't ram anything down people's throats. You let them make up their minds. But I think that's for people who know nothing about Egypt, even though you don't really tackle a lot of the subjects we're talking about here. It's a nice entrance point, simple book, and that's honestly one of the most unique books I've ever read. And like I said, I couldn't categorize it, and I like that. I really like that you didn't go out of your way to say exactly what it is. I'm just reading, going, what the fuck is this?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. It has, that's kind of what I was intending, really. So.
Yeah, and I see it's been really well reviewed on Amazon and Goodreads, and I really encourage people to go to that. Now, there's one book you've written which is very different to all your rest, and that's Matrix Visions.
Yeah.
Now, for people who are Harry Whitewolf fans, they'd probably go through your books and then hang on, what Matrix Visions? Can you tell me?
I don't recommend
you don't recommend your own book.
Yeah, I keep that one quiet.
Well, this is going to segue into something. I was hoping here that we can.
Yeah, sure.
We've touched on conspiracy subjects. Well, I believe we're touching on many things that are conspiracy facts, not conspiracy theories. And but I think in general with these type of discussions, whether it's a podcast or group discussion or whatever, you're just sort of led. At the end of the day, you're led to the level of okay, well, you've got a global elite or something like that, or you've got these bastards in power. But
Mhm.
what I've picked up with Matrix Visions is that you believe, and I'm on your wavelength there, but
Mhm.
you believe there's a spiritual conspiracy above that, which most researchers into how the elite work and that
Yeah.
don't never really talk about or aren't aware of. And you
Sure.
believe that this, that whole Matrix Visions is about, you're doing it through poetry, which is brilliant, but you're also showing the symbolism that the elite use in there to sway our subconscious minds, whether it's through the political slogans, whether it's through the corporate slogans like Nike and that.
Yeah.
And then you're implying something. Can you talk about what you're implying is behind all that at the higher level?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
It's a bitch of a question. Sorry.
There you go. No. Yeah, no, I mean, I was just thinking, like, it's worth just quickly mentioning, I think, about you touching upon the elite, and that not many people are talking about the spiritual conspiracy. And the one exception to that, of course, is David Icke, who, is a lot more accepted now than he was before, but still has that kind of tag of he's a bit crazy going on.
Right.
But yeah, I didn't want to talk about him, but I just wanted to sort of bring up the fact that there are a lot of indicators that the elite are into some wacky spiritual shit. They have satanic ceremonies. I think that's beyond dispute. I guess that's too strong, but that's my personal feeling.
Well, I mean, if you use a loose definition of satanic, then yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, let's bring up a popular thing like Bohemian Grove, for instance. You know, we know that famous people, bankers, politicians in the US, once a year go to this ceremony in the woods. They dress up in black hooded robes, they light fires, and they have this huge stage show of burning a human effigy whilst talking in tongues that makes no fucking sense. And it was rumour for years, although we kind of knew it was going on, and then Alex Jones actually got some footage of it, which you can see on YouTube now. So that's just one thing to indicate to me that the elite are involved with some sort of religion that predates a lot of stuff. I mean, even if you look at the Freemasons, where you can trace that back to ancient Egypt. When you look at their symbology and all that stuff, you know that there's some kind of, at the top levels of Freemasonry, I mean, that there is some form of ancient religion. So I personally believe that, yeah, there is this. How much actual power they have in this world, I don't know, but I believe that the elite, that there is this small group that that believe all this stuff. I mean, even Hitler was into his supernatural stuff and hypnosis and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I just want to sort of say that to give a background of why it's maybe not as crazy as it first sounds, I suppose. To kind of say that there's a spiritual side to the conspiracy, because yeah, I do believe there is a conspiracy. I hate that word conspiracy because it automatically conjures up all sorts of stuff. But I believe stuff that I read about and think about, and look at facts and conclusions and evidence and all that sort of stuff. And then on the personal side, I'm a spiritual person. That's just something that's always been with me. It's not something I think of intellectually. I just know there's more to life than this one little human drop in the ocean. I just know that. So yeah, I've always been interested in these kind of ideas of the illusion of life, which, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, if you look at something like Buddhism, their concept of Maya, that everything here is illusion, that's kind of acceptable, and then you talk about the Matrix, people automatically think of the film, and they think of it in terms of science and aliens and stuff like that. Well, I don't think there has to be that division between the two. I mean, spirituality and science used to be one, I think. So when I talk about the Matrix, I don't really mean of it. I kind of mean of it beyond science and beyond spirituality. But ultimately, I mean that everything is an illusion, and I believe that it's purposely an illusion, that someone is in control of that illusion, or some things are in control of that illusion.
Right.
That's all stuff I've kind of believed for years, really. But it was in 2014 that I just had this insane awakening, which I still find impossible to talk about plainly. I feel like I need to write a whole book about it to even start to get across what I went through. But yeah, I had about 4 months of really feeling like I was going crazy, because I just started seeing the world in a different way, quite literally. And that started from seeing the subliminals. It started from seeing subliminals that they put into advertising and in films, but not the sort of subliminals that you can, that we know Kubrick did, and things that are accepted. I mean, things that I just started seeing myself. You know, it really was a case of like being the guy in that film Pi, where you just start going mad because you start seeing the Fibonacci sequence and everything. It was the same sort of feeling that everything I looked at conformed to a secret symbology.
Wow.
And that there were, like the picture of the old hag and the young girl. Do you know that one where if you look at this picture,
Yeah.
you see a young girl, and if you look at it a different way, it looks like an old hag. Or the what do you call them? The pictures that are made up of dots.
3D pictures, or
the magic eye pictures.
yeah.
Where you can't see anything, but if you look at it long enough, you can see a ship or whatever it is. What I'm basically saying is I feel as though I discovered that is in everything of mainstream
right. Well,
adverts and so on. That everything is a double optical illusion. And then when I discovered that, I started discovering that it was in nature as well.
wow.
Does that make sense?
Well, if I can try and unpack some of that, we've talked about how the elite seem to be ahead of the process in many ways. Like they may have an ancient religion, even though all these politicians are out there saying they're Christian or whatever the main religion is of that country. It seems like they're practicing something else, and that it's not just in Bohemian Grove, but even, Stanley Kubrick was a very connected individual, and what he said in Eyes Wide Shut, he seems to be commenting on that. I would also implore anyone listening to go onto YouTube and search, I forget the name of the tunnel, but it was the Swiss tunnel in about 2015, an opening ceremony. And in that, you've got a lot of Europe's key businessmen, politicians, and so on, and it's total eyes wide shut before your eyes if you watch it. Now,
it's insane.
Wasn't it insane? And actually, I think, sorry, you sent that to me, didn't you? You were the one who put me onto that, I think.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I just couldn't believe. At first, I thought this has got to be a joke. Is this real? But yes, that's so. People can laugh at that, but the point is, the people above us in power are doing all this stuff, and they believe something's going on. Now, in Matrix Visions, you are showing the symbols they use that they believe can influence us, but beyond that, there's been many people speculated we're living in a matrix, and even if you go beyond the movie The Matrix, which once again, that's very recent, that came out about 1999, I think.
Yeah.
Now you've got, since then, quantum physics and various types of science is starting to, it appears that they're starting to prove that, we are in some sort of simulated world, or what we're experiencing is not actually reality.
If I could just quickly chip in just the last few months, NASA astrophysicists have actually said we are living in a holographic universe. They've actually said, I mean, that's only the opinion of a small number of scientists, but they've said that. They say, what we're looking at now means that this universe conforms to living in a hologram.
Right. So, but you're taking it a step further to say that whoever the ruling elite are, or somebody higher than the known global elite, are able to, they're aware of this, what controls this matrix, or they're aware, they somehow know patterns on how to influence that.
Yeah, I mean,
Right. Yeah.
my personal belief, and that's why I try to sort of make the distinctions between my personal beliefs and the facts that we know, because
Sure.
there's both. But my personal belief is that the conspiracy, runs higher than this world. That it's not human beings in charge at all. Now, who the top elite in the spiritual realms are, I have no idea. Whether you want to call that aliens or demons makes no difference to me, really. I think that those terms that we use are human attributions, that we need to get beyond this kind of distinction between aliens, demons, all this sort of stuff. I just think that there are other worlds out there,
Yeah.
other worlds that conform to different laws of physics, different vibrationary states, where many different things are possible, whether you see that as a religious thing or a possible quantum physics scientific kind of thing. I think that there are these other worlds and a hierarchy within that, with the planet Earth, or this world that we live in, at least, is sort of trapped. So yeah, I think the conspiracy, goes way beyond
Wow.
our planetary life, and that there are these beings, these other things that we don't know about, that are actually putting the shots.
Right. Well, just to contribute, so that you're not the only madman here. If any mainstream people are listening now, they're going, "What the hell?" But
Oh yeah, sure. The
but
corner, yeah.
but I had a series of, before I got into any of this research or any interest in, what this world's about. Between the ages of 10 and 14, 10 and 15, I had regular out of body experiences, and
Right.
that's, when you before you mentioned phrases like there's other worlds out there, but different vibrational states. I mean, that's what I experienced.
Yeah.
Often nightly, seeing something, and I knew that I'm more than my physical body.
Yeah.
Now, so that fits into me, but I couldn't control that, and I've never had those since, and I don't know what that's about. I've just got a knowing that what you're saying there has validity to it. But maybe, whether it's the highest level Freemasons or whoever, maybe some of the elite still have the knowledge from the ancient Egyptians or whatever it may be, and they understand what this realm really is, and the rest of us are in the dark. And I've just got a feeling that we're not meant to be in the dark like this. And that's potentially, as I said before, most people stop at the problems in the world. Like, they see all these wars, all this banking, all this corruption, but maybe the problem is just humans in general. Like, we're not meant to be living in this state, and we're just like, are we really meant to live in this amnesiac state where we don't know what's going on? At the end of the day, it seems like it's bound to lead to crime and chaos.
Sure. I mean, I've said before that I kind of see this world as a prison, which seems like quite a tag to put on life, to call it a prison. And I was talking to a mate about this, and he didn't get it at all, because he was just like, but because he's someone that was living a great life. He's got a beautiful wife, a lovely baby. He's had a great time in life, and he's like, well, how could this possibly be a prison when there's all this good and beauty and loveliness going on? But my reply to that is just that, because we don't know what reality is.
Right.
We grew up in this reality. We're born in these human bodies. I think our souls are trapped in these bodies purposely, as opposed to, so that's when I say it's a prison, the Matrix. That's kind of what I mean. That and until you are outside of the Matrix, until you are outside of your human body, outside of this world as we know it, with all of its science and numbers and all the rest of it, you can't possibly comprehend what the other side of that is. We have no idea at all.
We have no idea. And I mean, there could be a silver lining in what you say there. I mean, it sounds pretty shit, like this world's a prison. But actually, what happens when we get beyond that prison? And maybe people like, some of the great religious teachers and so on, before they changed their message and rewrote it, maybe they were trying to tell us this. We just don't know. I mean, I think the peoples that are possibly the most interesting to study, besides the Hindus you mentioned, they talk about Maya and the whole world's illusion, is the Gnostic peoples, which is somewhere between, strikes me as somewhere between whatever the Jews were originally and then what Christians became. For a brief period, there was a very interesting religion there, or philosophy of life, which was the Gnostic peoples, and possibly, that they seem to be talking about something very similar to the Matrix as well. So I don't think you're crazy, but I do warn anybody, before you read Matrix Visions, just know.
Know that I'm crazy.
So no, that's a great note to end this thing, because I think there's a lot for people to think about there, and we've blown it apart beyond the usual conspiracy stuff, which is we broke the norm, mate. So that's awesome.
Nice. We broke the fourth wall.
Yeah. And can you end it with any plugs, like, where can people find you? You've got a website now, have you? Or?
Yeah, people can find me on my website, harrywhitewolf.com. Goodreads.com is the place that I tend to hang out, so if you want to follow me or get to know me, then you can go on there. Underdogs Unite, the poetry collection you were talking about, will be out at the end of September. Okay. So yeah, that'll be out soon. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I'm involved with at the moment is writing is an anthology that I'm doing with some other indie writers, which is going to be an anti-austerity anthology. So we've got some great writers and poets that we're getting together to do that. People like Rupert Dreyfuss and Mike Robbins are getting involved with it. So yeah, that's going to be coming out next year sometime. So that's kind of the projects I've got going. Yeah. Okay,
and I'd also encourage anyone else who's interested in your work to also look you up on YouTube. You've got a lot of performance videos and reciting of your works there. So yeah, and thanks a lot for being my first guest on this.
Oh, it's my pleasure, James. Thank you very much for asking me on. Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Okay, cheers, Harry. Thanks.
All right. Cheers, James.
Bye now.